Welcome to Jazz Zone Together, our new online jazz community where we will provide jazz education and classroom resources, interviews with jazz educators, artists, and celebrities, along with valuable tips and repertoire suggestions. Today, we welcome world-renowned trumpeter and band leader Mike Vax. Mike is an artist representative for Warburton Music Products and performs exclusively on their instruments. He's also active as a performer, recording artist, and clinician. Now I'll bring in our host, Dick Dunscomb, to conduct the interview with Mike. Dick, it's all yours.
Thank you, Bob. Well, look at there. There's Mike Vax. Hey, man.
But we haven't seen each other in quite a while, Dick.
I know, man. And you brought the Capitol Records along with you today.
Yeah, I thought, I have all these different backgrounds. I can put us on the Kenton Legacy Orchestra band bus. I can do but I thought, you know what? Capitol Records, that would be a good one for today.
I like it.
Since we'll talk about Stan Kenton a lot. So there you go.
Absolutely. Well, before we get into that, let's go back in time and talk about you as a young lad and what led you into music and how did you choose music as your career path?
Well, I love this story. You remember we used to call them song flutes. Now they call them recorders. But Mrs. Aldridge was the orchestra director at my elementary school back in the late 40s and the early 50s. Boy, Oakland, California had an unbelievable music program in their schools. And so in my elementary school, we had a 100-piece orchestra. And you usually would, in the third grade, she would come around and hand out the song flutes, and get all the kids to play. And the ones that looked like they might have a little talent or whatever would, in the fourth grade, then could go in the orchestra. Well, I got so turned on with this little song flute that after about, 6 weeks or something, and this was supposed to be for the year, and after about 6 weeks, I went to Mrs. Aldridge and I said, what do you want me to do now? And she said, well, I want you to do next week's lesson. And I said, no, you don't understand. I know the whole book. And so I played the stuff in the back of the book for her. And I remember at one point, I think she said to my mom, I thought, what do I do with this kid? So they put me in the orchestra in the high third grade. And we didn't have enough money to buy a horn, and all the school horns were pretty much given out. So she finds this old beat up cornet without even a case. And she puts it in my hand and she says, this is what you're playing. So my joke has always been the horn found me, I didn't find it. And, and I fell in love with it immediately. I mean, it was like my mom would have to force me to stop playing the horn so I could do my homework. And I started taking private lessons by the time I was in the fourth grade, and I took private lessons all the way through university, and I sort of had in the back of my mind, even when I was young, boy, this is really fun. I wonder if I could do this, and so it got more and more involved. And in junior high, we started this little combo, and we rehearsed in my parents' basement. So the guys in the band said, well, we rehearsed in your parents' basement. You're the leader. Go find us some work. And so I actually did find us. This was again, about maybe ninth grade. And I remember our first gig was for the Glenview Women's Club, and it was for a luncheon. And we got paid $4 a piece. And we thought, this is amazing, man, $4. And we just played our instruments, so I had a group literally all through junior high. And then in high school, my group started working a lot, and we were even playing for a lot of fraternity parties at University of California and stuff. And then at one point, one of the union representatives came by a gig and said, we understand that this band is working quite a bit, and we think it's time you join the union. And we're still high. So I joined the union when I was 17. And I immediately got this gig with Dick Smith and his orchestra. And it was a real society band, no jazz, just real society band. And so here I am, 17 years old, and I'm playing with, how should we say it, all these old farts, these old guys, and I'm this young kid. But what an experience and what a learning process, because these were all seasoned pros, and here I am, this kid just getting started. And then from that, the Claremont Hotel in Oakland used to have all the big bands. It's still there. It's a beautiful hotel. And I forget exactly who got me on the gig, but Shep Fields was at the Claremont for a weekend, and they needed another trumpet player. So I got recommended for it, and I got one on the gig, go your tux and everything. And I don't know if you remember Shep Fields, but his theme was Rippling Rhythm, and the band would play the theme, and he would have like a champagne glass with a straw in it, and he would blow bubbles into the microphone, and so I mean, it's the first night on a gig, and he starts doing that, and I start laughing. And the lead trumpet player looks at me and says, "You want to be back tomorrow night? You'd better quit that." I mean, I had no idea who Shep Fields was. So that was one of my first big band gigs, other than, the local stuff. And but by that time, I already knew that really what I wanted to do was play music. And most of my studying had been in the classical idiom. And even though I listened to jazz constantly, I wasn't playing a lot of jazz, and I was really focusing on the classical end. In fact, my senior year in high school, I was a sub for the Oakland Symphony. And then I played in a group called the Berkeley Young People's Symphony, which was this very hoity-toity thing of the best, young players in the Bay Area. And so I was really thinking about, okay, I want to be a symphony player. I want to get a gig in an orchestra. And so that's what I was working on. But I was also playing in these dance bands and stuff, doing a little bit of improvisation, but not very much. And so, I got a scholarship to University of Pacific, to the Conservatory there, which back then was a complete classical conservatory. I mean, they didn't even allow jazz. And I had applied for other schools, but since I wanted to be a symphony player, I said, well, that conservatory is the best thing. So I didn't even try to get into places like North Texas or Northridge or any of those great jazz schools, because I was heading for the symphony world. Well, in the spring semester of my senior year, Don Jacoby came to Oakland High and did a clinic and a concert. And the interesting thing is, if you know Fred Radke, who has led the Harry James Orchestra for years, Fred and I have been best friends since we were like 13 years old. And so when Jake came to the high school, if the band director said that there were a couple of trumpet players that could handle that Carnival Variations trio that he had, then he would do it. So the two kids that played with him that night were me and Fred Radke. And the funny thing is, we were best friends, but we used to have this ongoing argument. He'd say, Harry James is the best. I'd say, you're full of it. Stan Kenton is the band, And we used to argue about it. Now you think about the odds against those two kids ending up playing lead trumpet on those bands and now leading those bands. It's like the odds are phenomenally against it. But and Jake found out that I was a huge Kenton fan, and he said, "Did you know Don Jacoby very well, Dick?"
I did, yes.
Yeah, well then you know Jake well enough to know that he said, "Listen, kid, you need to come to the Kenton Clinic. You need to come to the camp this summer." And I said, I knew nothing about it because it started in '59 and this was '60. We hadn't heard a lot about it on the West Coast yet. It was at Indiana University. And so Jake says, you need to go to this. So he gets him to send me all the information. Well, again, my family didn't have a lot of money, and it turned out that all the scholarship money had been given out, but so I called up him and I said, Mr. Jacoby, I can't afford to do it. He said, listen, just get there, kid. Okay. So my uncle bought me a train ticket from Oakland, California to Bloomington, Indiana. It was an interesting ride. And that was the summer that Jake had infection in his gums, so he couldn't go. So he calls up Connie Condoli and Kansas Jimmy Maxwell and says, I want you to look out for my kid Mike, because he's coming. Well, so I get there. I don't know what's going to go on. I get there. It's, oh, yes. Okay, Mike. Well, you go for your interview. I was so scared. I don't remember the interview. I don't. But, and back then it was mostly college students. So I was one of the really young ones. And I think I made lead in like the third or fourth band out of, I don't know, it was 10 or 12 bands. And, but they needed a fourth trumpet player for the faculty band, for the Kenton Band, because the Kenton Band was off. And the faculty, if you remember a couple of those years, it was like a who's who of who'd played with Stan. Eddie Safransky was on bass, Sal Salvador and Jack Peterson were on guitar, Connie Condoli, Jimmy Maxwell, Sam Donahue, Charlie Mariano, Buddy Baker, I mean, on and on, and they needed a fourth trumpet player, and they put me in the Kenton Band, in the faculty band, and I'm saying, wow, well, this is really cool. And, well, that changed my life, because I decided right then at that camp, I did not want to be a symphony player. I wanted to play on Stan Kenton's band. And at the end of the 2 weeks, I went up to Stan, and I was even shorter than I am now. So you can imagine I'm looking up, I went up to Stan and I said, Mr. Kenton, I'm going to play on your band someday. And he said, and I quote, if you want to bad enough, you probably will. And of course, what I heard was, Stan Kenton said I can play in his band. So, I mean, that was my life's goal right there at 17 years old. Now, the kicker to this story is, years later, after I'd been in the Navy show band and done all the traveling with that, and I went on the Kenton Band, we're playing in Dallas, and Don Jacoby had moved from Waukegan, Illinois to Dallas, and he was president of the union. No, this was before he was president of the union, because he was still gigging. So he's playing, I think it was called the Keynote Club, and Lou Marini was in the band, and I mean, this was a really good band that Jake had. So we brought the trumpet section over to the club, but before that, I called Jake, and I said, and I still called him Mr. Jacoby. He used to get mad. I said, Mr. Jacoby, this is Mike Vax. We haven't talked in a while because I've been out of the country in the Navy. I'm in town playing a concert tonight. And he said, well, you are. Who are you playing with? And I said, I'm playing lead on Stan's band. And Jake started to cry a little bit because he knew how much that meant to me, and we hadn't talked, and so it's like, oh my God. So I brought the trumpets down, and we hung out all night. This is when Jake had his condo at Lake Dallas. We hung out all night. Almost missed the bus the next day because, if you're with Jake, you're imbibing at least a little bit. So at one point, Dory, for those who don't know, that was Jake's wife, and she was a female Jake. She was exactly like him. Dory grabs me and she pulls me into this one room and she says, listen, I'm going to tell you something, okay? And you can't tell Jake. If you tell Jake, I'll never speak to you again. And I said, I'm thinking she's mad at me or something. And I said, if you don't want me, I won't. She said, when Jake called Ken Morris at the camps, all the scholarships were given out. Jake paid your way to go to that camp.
Oh, wow.
And that's the kind of guy he was.
Yeah, he definitely was. Mike, let's just pause here for a second, because there's so many things that are interacting at this point in history, jazz-wise. The Kenton Clinics, the beginning of NAJE, all of these things were beginning to intersect. I remember the first time I think I met you was at one of the Kenton Clinics.
Yep.
in Indiana. And so talk a little bit about how that all worked as you began your career with Stan.
Well, the first thing I think is so important is Stan was really one of the fathers of jazz education. He was really the first band leader to, on a consistent basis, bring his band into schools and do clinics in the afternoon. And he was one of the first people that started summer jazz camps, and because he knew that if the music was to survive, you had to get to the young people. You had to get new audiences for the music. You can't just play for the old people that are remembering the 40s. So I think that one of the reasons Stan Kenton has to be one of the most important people in the history of jazz is because of his dedication to jazz education. And I forget, Dick, if you were in on that meeting. There was a party, a little hangout in Stan's suite. I think it was at the Midwest, and I know that John Roberts was there, and Jack Wheaton and Herb Wong, and a bunch of people that ended up starting IAJE, Matt Bennett, and they were complaining about the lack of jazz in these conventions. And Stan basically said, then get off your ass and do something about it. Let's get something started. And a lot of people don't know, but Stan put up the first money to help start NAJE. Now, Dick, were you in on that meeting? I can't remember who all was.
No, it was still a little bit before the time that I got involved. But Matt Benton was another one that was there, and Bill Lee.
Yep,
that whole
Bill was there.
They were amazing. You're absolutely right. It was the beginning of the jazz education movement.
Yeah, and I think it was so funny because that's what he said is get off your asses and do something about it. You knew Stan well enough to know if he was, he was the nicest guy in the world and the best leader to ever work for. But if he wanted something done, man, he just told you and you did it, So anyway, so when I joined the band, it was exactly 10 years after I had told Stan I was going to play on his band. And it was interesting because I was still in the Navy. I just spent 4 years in the Navy. I was in the Navy show band, the original Navy show band before the Commodores existed. And we traveled for the State Department in South America, the United States, and all kinds of stuff. It was a great band. And so I was in the Navy, and I went, and I was Stan was, involved in trying to help people in Synanon, and I was donating my time because Synanon had a Santa Monica place, and then they had a place at the Old Athens Club in Oakland, California. So I would go in and simply sit with the musicians and have coffee and let them talk. And we'd talk about what they'd done on the road and everything. So guys like Frank Rehack and Art Pepper and all kinds of those people became really close friends through Synanon. And we all know that Synanon ended up, because Chuck Diedrich went off the deep end, and it ended up being a cult kind of thing. But in the beginning, it saved Frank Rehack, it saved Art Pepper, it saved Joe Pass, it saved all kinds of musicians. And so the Oakland Synanon, there was a guy, Greg Dykes, who was in Synanon, who was a composer, and he composed an Easter mass, jazz mass, and it actually won an Emmy. It got videoed. Anyway, so I'm playing in this thing, and we go to do a joint concert. We did one in Oakland with the Synanon people from Santa Monica. Then we went down to Santa Monica, and when we did the one up in Oakland, Jim Karchner, the lead player before me, was playing for the Synanons in Santa Monica. So I find out Jim Karchner's there, man, and I go up, and this is one of the things I tell kids, one of the most important things to have besides your instruments, a business card. And I hand Jim a business card, and I said, listen, Stan Kenton is my idol. If there's ever an opening, I would love to audition for the band. So I get a call from Dick Shearer, and he said, well, you're coming down to Santa Monica to do the concert, so we'd like you to come to the office and audition. Okay, so I go to the office. The band's not together. They're not rehearsing. This is when Stan had been off and not doing a whole bunch of touring. And so my audition was Jim Karchner and me on the first and second trumpet books for an hour. And he'd play lead and I'd play second, and then I'd play lead and he'd play second. You know, my phone's ringing, my wife will get it. Anyway, and so this was like for an hour, you know, and they wanted to see, yeah, this kid have chops. So, you know, I get through and my audition was in front of Stan, Clinton Romer, and Dick Shearer. And so, you know, and Dick was road manager then. And so we finished the audition and they said, listen, you did great, but we have other people got audition too. You know, and I leave and I think, yeah, don't call us, we'll call you, you know. But at least I got a chance. Well, a few days later, I get a call from Shearer. And this is like mid-April of 1970. I get a call from Shearer and he says, listen, we'd like to have you join the band. We leave on tour May 2nd. I hadn't even thought about the fact I was still in the Navy. You know, I hadn't thought about that. I got an audition. So I said to Dick, I said, I don't get out of the Navy till the fall. And I hear him talking with Stan, and Stan gets on the phone and he says, listen, I may have you get like the president of the union or something to write a letter to your base, but let me make a couple phone calls. To this day, I don't know who Stan called. I was out of the Navy May 1st.
Oh, wow.
And I joined the band May 2nd. So I was like 3 or 4 months early out of the Navy. And my first gig was playing for the Bob Hope golf tournament in Palm Springs, Indian Wells. And they had the band on a float in a water hazard. You know, this is like my first day out of the Navy and I'm playing in a float in a water hazard. And the float starts to sink a little bit, and Von Olin was in this little cubby thing. And so the water was starting to come where the drums were. And in fact, at one point, one of his charts was floating out. And I'm thinking, and so, you know, we backed up Phil Harris, we backed up Lawrence Welk, we backed up Hoagie Carmichael, who had been imbibing and basically figured we played the wrong changes to Stardust. and I forget, a bunch of other people. It's just like this talent show. And I'm thinking, I waited all my life for this. My first night on the Kenton, but then we left on tour, you know, and I spent 2.5 years on the band, and it was interesting because, you know, I started out just as third trumpet, and it wasn't Maynard's book, it wasn't like the high note book, it was just third trumpet, and Jim Karchner let me play a few lead things. Well, poor Jim had a brain tumor, and he didn't know it. And he was having all kinds of problems. So the week that we were going to do the Redlands album, and, you know, that was Stan's first album on Creative World. As good a guy as Stan was, he had become sort of a Buddy Rich guy, man. He was like scared to death about this whole thing. He was thinking of bringing in a bunch of ringers. And Willie Maiden, rest his soul, went to Stan and said, Stan, these kids are playing your music as good as anybody's ever played it. If you use any ringers, you can't record my charts. He said, you let the kids play. So that brought Stan back a little bit. Anyway, so, but in the audience the first night were Don Menza, Buddy Childers, and 3 or 4 other guys, just in case, I guess, for Stan. But, you know, we did fine. Anyway, so that was the very first major recording session of my life in front of all those, you know, 1,000 people, live recording. And anyway, so Jim goes to Stan and says, I don't want to mess up the album. I cannot handle the lead book. And of course, a few years later, he died of this brain tumor, and very young, but he didn't know what he had at the point. So Saturday morning before Sunday, when we fly to Redlands, we're in Denver at Ignatius Gardens, and we're staying at the old Friendly Frontier Hotel. And I get woken up by Dick Shearer, and he says, listen, come down and have breakfast with Stan and I. And in the elevator going down, I'm thinking, why am I getting fired? I'm only the third trumpet player. You know, what do I tell the people in San Francisco? I lasted 3 months on the Kenton Band, you know. So we go down, and they're doing small talk during breakfast, and I'm thinking, you SOBs, if you're going to fire me, just get it over with. And this is like indelible in my brain. We're finished with breakfast, and Stan has his, and the coffee stops halfway. His coffee cup starts halfway down. It stops, and he stares at me. It seemed like forever. And I'm thinking, here it comes. And the first thing out of his mouth is, the trumpet section, I won't use this exact wording, the trumpet section is really screwed up. Can you handle a lead book? I said, yeah, I can handle a lead book. Now dig this. He says, good, and it better be right Monday night when we start recording. A little pressure. So we played Elitch's Gardens Saturday night, the dance book. We weren't playing the concert stuff. So then we fly to Redlands, and we do a little Sunday concert, you know, where we do 2 or 3 tunes, and we start recording Monday night. So a whole bunch of those charts I had never played lead on. Now, I played the charts on third trumpet, but I'd never played lead, so I'm starting reading the lead book. And the very first thing I had to play on that recording session was Here's That Rainy Day, with the scariest one-bar trumpet solo in history. And Joe Marcinkiewicz, you know, who's a famous mouthpiece and trumpet maker, he and I went through the Navy together, and I got him on the Kenton Band much later, but he's in the audience, and he comes up afterwards, and he said, Mike, he said, you sounded just great tonight, but I have one question. He said, you know how you have to use a straight sound with Stan, you can't use vibrato? And I said, yeah. And he said, how do you keep a straight sound when I can see your knees shaking from the audience? That was probably the scariest night of my life.
Well, you know, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because there's a lesson for all of the aspiring musicians that want to be successful. You got to be able to read.
Yep, exactly. And you know what? I liked in my clinics, I always mention, I asked them, how many of you have been in the Boy Scouts? And a few of us, what's the Boy Scouts motto? Be prepared. Mm-hmm. And I say, and that has to be the musician's motto. You've got to be prepared. You know, I've been very, very lucky with some of the breaks I've had, but breaks don't come if you're not prepared. Mm-hmm. You know, you might get an audition for a band, and if you can't hack it, you're not going to get the gig. You know, so to me, that whole thing, and I learned from great teachers early on that you need to know how to play every style imaginable. You know, when I went on the Miller Band for the short time with Buddy DeFranco, had I played like I was playing on the Kenton Band, I'd have been fired. I had to know how to play like you play on the Miller Band, right. You know, and you don't play on Count Basie's band the way you play on Woody Herman's band. And so one of the things, and I know one of the questions we'll talk about later too, is that what's with jazz education these days. But one of the things that I tell teachers is you do not have the kids do enough listening. Mm-hmm. You know, and they're worried about learning charts to go to contests, and they're learning by rote. And I said, you know, if I was a high school band director, and I'm gonna make this like you know, outside, I only rehearse 2 days a week for an hour. Okay, that's all the time I got with my band. Every rehearsal, I would play something for them that is not wasted time. Mm-hmm. Because then we can discuss what they heard. And if the band's playing a Buddy Rich chart, you don't have to play the same chart. Play a Buddy Rich chart for the kids. Let them hear what that band sounds like. You know, if you're going to play a Duke Ellington chart, let them hear what a Duke Ellington chart should sound like. You know, and so that whole be prepared thing of knowing the styles and what to do and how to do it, where to use vibrato, where not to use vibrato, how you do a fast shake or a slow shake, depending on the band. There's so many things, and I think that needs to be taught to young people early on. I was very lucky at Oakland High. We had dance band and we played for the school dances. But our teacher knew a lot of the guys in the bands, and we had manuscript out of a lot of the big bands. So we would play those old stocks and stuff, but we would also have manuscript from the bands themselves we could play. And a lot of, Fred Radke and I came out of that band. A lot of other great players that ended up in the studios, whatever top players in the Bay Area, all came out of that same band, because our teacher knew that we had to be prepared if we were going out into the world.
I couldn't agree with you more. I can't tell you the number of times that I have said that to clinics, to groups around the world. If you don't listen, you don't learn the language. And it's just that simple. It's just that simple. So, Mike, I know you could begin to tell stories and go on for 3 hours about the Kenton experience, but let's transition a little bit from your time with Kenton up to the beginning of the Stan Kenton Legacy Orchestra.
Okay, well, I've been lucky. I did some touring with the Jimmy Dorsey Orchestra under Lee Castle. I played it. Actually, my Glenn Miller thing was like a week. I think it was 5 nights, but it was under Buddy DeFranco, and they were playing at Mr. Kelly's, and we were off with the Kenton Band that week. And they said, and Dale Thompson, the lead player, said, "Would you play with us?" I said, "Sure, I'll play." In fact, my joke of that is at the end of the week, they gave me my check, and I said, "Gee, I feel a little guilty taking this check." And he said, "Well, what do you mean? You played your ass off?" I said, "Well, every night on the Kenton Band, I'm so tired, I can barely get out of my chair. And every night at the end of this band, I'm just getting warmed up." He knew I was joking, but anyway, and then of course, I'm this musical chameleon, from going from a classical player, but I've also played traditional jazz all my life. And so when I got off the Kenton Band, I got hired to tour with Pee Wee Hunt. And everybody in that band was old enough to be my grandfather, except the clarinet player. And the interesting thing is, I took Bobby Hackett's place on Pee Wee Hunt's band. Talk about two different players. In fact, Chuck Hedges, great clarinet player, came on the band a little bit later. And the first night we're playing, and I'm, what people don't realize is probably the first high note player was Louis Armstrong. I mean, his range was unbelievable. He's, sometimes I'll play up high and play in traditional and say, "Oh, well, Louis would never do that." I said, "How many records have you listened to?" He was the first one. But anyway, so Chuck Hedges says to me on the first break, "Listen, on bands like this, the clarinet is supposed to be the one that plays high notes."
Oh.
But anyway, so I toured with Pee Wee Hunt off and on for 3 years before, and then before he retired. And then I got called. This is interesting. I was doing a clinic in Waukesha, Wisconsin, and I get a call at the band director's home after the concert. And so the phone rings. The band director, Ted Binger was his name. The band director answers, and then he gives him the phone and says, "It's for you." So, "What do you mean it's for me? What is it, Hollywood?" And so it's John Shoup, who at that point owned the name of Dukes of Dixieland. And Frank Asunto had died. Connie Jones helped out for a couple of weeks, 3 weeks, but he didn't want to do it. And John basically called the Con Corporation and said, "Who do you know that can play traditional jazz, that knows how to lead a band?" And they said, "Well, Mike Vax." So he called me at this band director's house. He got the number from Con, And he said, we'd like you to come to New Orleans and take over the Dukes of Dixieland. Are you interested? And I said, well, sure, I'm interested. I've been a fan of the Dukes since I was a kid. What do I have to? He said, we need you here tomorrow. What? And so he said, I've already checked on how I can change your flight. And so they changed my flight. I flew to New Orleans. The limo picked me up at the airport, took me down to the Monteleone Hotel where the Duke's place was, the top club up the top of the Monteleone Hotel. I meet the guys, learn their names, or I get a piece of paper with their names. We talk about tunes that we can play together, and we walk over to the Marriott Ballroom and play for 5,000 people. It's at this huge convention, and it's like, okay, well, I know pretty much what the Dukes do, you know. Anyway, so I was with the Dukes for a little over 2 years, and then I started my own group in New Orleans and did touring out of New Orleans, you know, and I guess what I should also mention is, you know, I mentioned it a little bit, being in the Navy show band, because that band, it was the hardest working band in the history of the armed forces. It's actually documented. We did 2 to 5 concerts a day, 7 days a week when we were on the road. And that book was like a Vegas show book. And so mainly we toured South America. President Kennedy had started a whole goodwill thing. So we toured South America. But of course, that was before I got on the Kenton Band. But that really, I think, got me prepared for what I was going to do on the Kenton Band, playing in that band. So anyway, so I do the Dukes, live in New Orleans for about 3.5 years. Then I decided, no, I think I want to get back to doing more big band stuff and clinics and all this kind of stuff. And I want to move back to California. So I get a gig, be a music director for a show at Lake Tahoe, which was the impetus to move back. And then when that gig was maybe 6 months, I don't remember. And then I made a decision. I love doing clinics. You know, I had chances to go out with other big bands, but I said, I love doing clinics. I want to become a full-time clinician, which is what I did. And so my main source of income for 50 years has been doing clinics, you know, in high schools and colleges. And, so that's the ringtone of my, it's my trumpets group. It's the ringtone of, I forgot to, let me turn my thing off. Oh, well, okay. Anyway, so I started doing clinics full time, and other than the bands that I've basically led, although during that time I have played with these other bands, but mainly it's been doing clinics. And what really got me started with the Kenton Legacy Orchestra was in 1991. It was the 50th anniversary of the beginning of the Kenton Orchestra, and we just celebrated the 80th anniversary on Memorial Day weekend. And so 50th anniversary of the band, and Rory Snyder was the band director at that point at De Anza College, where Herb Patno had been. And of course, Herb had been the administrator for the Kenton camps, and Herb passed away very young. And so Rory calls me and he said, listen, it's the 10th anniversary of the festival. It's the 50th anniversary of the Kenton Band. Could you put together an alumni band to play for the evening concert of the festival? And I said, I know all the guys. Yeah, I'll try to work on that. And well, I put together a killer band, and it really was people from all kinds of eras. I mean, Johnny Coppola was there from the late 40s, you know, through guys that were there with me in the 70s. And so we put this band together. It sounded great. We just had a rehearsal in the afternoon, and at that point we played basically all Kenton music, you know, from when the band was going. And so and Tom Johnson, who ended up being our recording engineer and sound engineer for tours for years, was there and recorded that night. and he gave me a cassette of it. The band sounded really good, and the guys in the band are now calling me and saying, maybe we should try to do more of this. And I'm busy doing clinics and stuff. Anyway, I get a call. This was 91. I get a call in 93 from Morningside College in Sioux City, Iowa. There, huge jazz festival. I mean, there were like 100 bands or something like that over the weekend. And and they said the same thing. Would you put together a Kenton alumni group to play for us? And I said, oh yeah, I would love to do it. So I put together the group again. We go there, and we're there for like 4 days, 4 or 5 days, and doing clinics. And some of the guys are doing judging. And when we played a couple of concerts, and a friend of mine, Bill Dean, who was owned a recording company, recorded us. And so we got our first CD out of that. And again, the guys are saying, this is too good. This is too good. We gotta. In fact, I'll tell you an interesting thing. That night, after we did 2 concerts, 2 or 3, I don't remember. But anyway, the first night, it was pretty emotional. And, everybody, I mean, this was from George Roberts, again, to the guys that had been on the band with me and different years. But when we got to playing the theme at the end, it ended up that the band and some of the audience were in tears. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's like we felt like Stan was there, and we knew he didn't want a ghost band, but we felt that, we could. Anyway, so they're on me now. You gotta do something. So 95, we go back to Morningside College, and we actually have a DVD from that. And then I start working on it. I think 1998 was maybe the first real tour. And so from that time to now, we've done, I think it's 24 national tours. And I'm the booking agent for all of it, and so it's been interesting that, because we're one of the very last road bands, let's face it, the Miller Band still travels, Basie Band travels once in a while, Tommy Dorsey and Jimmy Dorsey bands travel once in a while. It's funny that the Tommy Dorsey Band is now led by a sax player, and the Jimmy Dorsey Band was led by a trombone player, and now it's led by a singer. But we're one of the last bands that actually gets on the bus and goes on tours. And the difference is that we, like Stan did, do clinics every afternoon in schools. Almost all our gigs are in schools. And so people will say, well, Stan had in his will he didn't want a ghost band. Well, Stan and Dick and I talked about that, when I was road manager. And basically, Stan didn't want some money people getting a hold of the band and making it a Miller Band playing the hits of the 40s. Because, Stan hated nostalgia. So that's basically why it's in the will. And so when this band really got started, in the beginning, I called it Mike Vax Big Band featuring alumni of the Stan Kenton Orchestra. Way too long a title, but I didn't want to infringe on the because I have a copy of the will, and it just says there will not be a band with my name on it. And so then, after quite a few years, Lance heard the band, Stan's son. He was thrilled. He said, oh man, this is great. He said, my dad would love this, because every tour we do new music. So the nostalgia part has gotten smaller and smaller. I will say probably now the Kenton hits are maybe 35% of what we play. Everything else is new music written in the Kenton style, because that's what Stan would have wanted. And the fact that we do clinics in all of these schools, which is what Stan really wanted. So when people ask me about that, and then of course Joanne, his first daughter, we won't talk about her book, but she was really in charge of stuff still. And she found out, well, she was living in New Zealand, and she and I did a thing together in England. They had a big Kenton convention, and she and I were on a panel together, and we started talking, and I sent her a bunch of stuff. She was just thrilled with this. In fact, she wanted me to call it the Stan Kenton Orchestra, and I said, no, I won't do that. Stan is not here. It's not the Stan Kenton Orchestra if Stan's not here. So she and I worked, and we came up with the Stan Kenton Legacy Orchestra. Actually, it was one name in between. When Lance talked to me and they wanted more, we called it the Stan Kenton Alumni Band. And at that point, most of the band were alumni. Well, sadly, some of them have passed away. Some of them have gotten older and they don't want to travel anymore. So that's when Joanne and I came up, because what we're doing is keeping the Kenton legacy alive. That's what we're all about. So that's why now we call it the Stan Kenton Legacy Orchestra. And of course, we've had to cancel 2 tours because of COVID, but I'm working on the 2022 tour right now. So we'll be out for probably about 3 weeks on the bus in the spring of 2022.
Good for you, Mike. I'm so proud of you for doing all of this and for keeping that alive. And I'm sure Stan would agree.
I think, let me just say one other thing. I think it's interesting because, Audrey Koch was Stan's manager and they were living together, and she did take very good care of him when he was ill that last year. But they never really did get married, although she used his name. She finally admitted it, but they never really did get married. And there were people that were wanting to do tribute things and stuff, and she was sort of thwarting it all. It's like, no, Stan wouldn't want this, blah, 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 blah. Mort Saul and I are very close friends, and Audrey was close friends with Mort. Audrey actually said to Mort, I think Stan would really approve of the way Vax is doing it.
Great. That had to make you feel good, man.
It does, because that's why I didn't want my name on the band, because the band is supposed to be about Stan Kenton, and so I think that we've been pretty successful in doing that and keeping the legacy going that he would like.
There's no question that you definitely have done that. Listen, let's head in a little different direction, but an offshoot of the orchestra. And that is the jazz education field. As you have mentioned periodically through this interview, your clinician title and being involved with jazz education. Talk to us a little bit about what you see in jazz education today. Where is it? Where should it go?
Well, I have, in fact, I forget if I sent you, I have a thing I did when the American Federation of Classic Jazz Societies was still going. I did a whole treatise on jazz education. This was probably 10, 15 years ago, but it really applies now. And I think, first of all, if I'm correct, if you count all the junior high and high school jazz bands and college jazz bands, there's almost 30,000 of them in this country today. It's become an important part of the curriculum, as well it should be, because why should we only play older European music? And even though there's modern concert band music written, it's still based on older European music. Jazz music, let's face it, it really is the only art form invented in America. And sometimes in my clinic, somebody will say, well, what about country and Western music? And my answer is, have you heard of the troubadours and trouvères? And sometimes they have, and sometimes they haven't. But I said, back in the dark ages, there were these guys that traveled around playing lutes, which were the precursors of guitars. What were they singing about? All the dirt from the last castle. That's country and Western music.
Yeah.
It's been around for 1,000 years, and too, when you think about country and Western and bluegrass, a lot of music that comes from the what's the mountain range in North Carolina and Virginia, and Just went out of my head. Anyway, the music that comes from there, there's a lot of influence from Irish music in that too. But jazz is really the only thing that was really invented in America. And yes, it was basically invented by black people. Very soon, the white people were playing it too. And when I lived in New Orleans, I thought it was very interesting that in New Orleans, they didn't care. Can you play your horn? Are you a nice guy? I don't care what you look like. Let's play. That was my whole feeling about playing in New Orleans all those years. So I played with a lot of the black bands. I played with Olympia. I played with Onward. I played with the Mahogany Hall Band. I got to play with people that you read about in books: Placida Adams, Frog Joseph, Teddy Riley, Freddie Coleman, Papa French, all these people that are famous from the early days. I got to play with them, and boy, I'll tell you what, I would sit down with them after the gig, and we'd have coffee or a drink, and I would really try to get into their minds about, okay, what was it like in those early days of jazz? And one of the things that they talk about is most of us couldn't read music. Most of us were not trained musicians. We learned everything by ear. There's the listening thing again, and the improvisation that was done earlier on in New Orleans was all based on the melody, because these people didn't know about chord changes. So their improvisation was based on melody. Well, the person who changed all that, and one of the reasons why he's one of the most important people in the history of jazz, was Louis Armstrong. If you listen to some of the Hot 5 and Hot 7 recordings, he's playing on the changes. He is not playing from the melody. And some of the stuff he's playing wasn't played again until the beboppers. Some of the stuff like Wild Man Blues and some of those things, it's just amazing what he was doing. And so he, and then Earl Father Hines, when he was playing with him, was trying to imitate Louis with his right hand. Well, it's hard to play stride piano, with the bass line and imitate Louis with the right hand. So basically, Earl Father Hines invented comping, playing just some light chords while he was imitating Louis with his right hand. I think that, there's so much stuff that came out of those Hot 5 and Hot 7 recordings, and those bands never played live. They only recorded, But so that my time in New Orleans, it was a real learning experience. And part of it was, up until that point, yes, I had played traditional jazz, I played with Pee Wee Hunt, but most of my work, first of all, had been classical, then later on had been lead and high note playing. So by moving to New Orleans and getting to the roots and only improvisation, that's when my jazz playing started opening up. Because I learned from all those old guys. Man, I was listening. Well, I'm playing on a gig, but I'm listening to what they're doing and sometimes trying to imitate it, And so I think that really I didn't get started as an improvising jazz player until my 30s. And I credit my time in New Orleans for really getting me started with that. So anyway, back to the jazz education thing. To me, it's really important that, yes, the kids have to learn how to read. They have to learn about the stylistic approaches for playing, but they have to learn some theory. They have to learn something about improvisation, okay? And I think that sometimes, and well, like I do, that you go into a lot of schools and the whole, how do I say this gently? The whole aim is to go win a trophy. And so they're going over the same charts over and over. And I'm thinking, aren't these kids getting bored with these charts? They've played them for 4 different festivals. They don't, so sight reading should be something that is done almost every day in a high school band curriculum or a college band curriculum, so that during rehearsal, get out one chart they haven't played and let them read it.
Mhm.
You know, and then build that up. I know the Folsom Jazz Festival that Curtis Gazer runs. Boy, that's a great festival and it's huge. And one of the things that he started was, okay, the bands, and it's a big trophy thing, you know, but the bands that make the evening playoffs, the way it works is they can play one of the tunes they played that day. They have to play another tune they didn't play that day. And then every year he would get a tune written that nobody saw. Nobody. And it would be handed out and they'd have to sight read it on the stage as part of who won the festival. And I'm going to tell you, I mean, he got Tom Kubas and Matt Cadden, but all these great writers writing charts. Well, some of those charts I wouldn't want to have to read, you know, sight read in front of an audience. I mean, it's like, whoa. And I to this day, I think, what a great idea, because now you're going to prove that a band isn't just memorizing charts.
Right.
You know, and so I think that's one of the, maybe the weak points, is that they need to do more sight reading. They need to have more time that they can spend with improvisation. You know, a lot of times when I go in the clinic, I just get the rhythm section to start playing blues, and I just point at people. And sometimes it's usually like a saxophone player. I can't do that, and I don't, and I'll actually stop and I'll try to be very nice and make a joke, and we'll say, listen, you can't imagine how much fun it is. I don't care what notes you play. Okay? Play one note and play a rhythm. I don't care. And I almost always I can finally get the scared ones to actually do something. And I say to the band director, once a week, take some time, play the blues. Or if you're working on a tune, like say it's got rhythm changes, and you know, you hand out the changes and you talk about it, and then let them play on that. But once a week, have every single person in the band improvise.
That's such great advice. And I'm telling you, Mike, this has been a fabulous interview. You are a wealth of information beyond belief. And I know it's not over. But before we let you go, would you do me a favor and play something for us today?
Yeah, I thought you were going to ask me that. I've been busy all morning, so this is going to be like my warm up.
All right.
And I'm thinking, well, what should I play? Well, you know, one of the things that I didn't talk about, and I should, because it's so important in my life, is being on Clark Terry's big band.
Mm-hmm.
How did I forget to put that in? You know, I played lead on Clark Terry's big band, and it was 1978, and we toured all over Europe and Scandinavia and behind the Iron Curtain. And Clark and I, you know, been best friends for over 40 years, and he's been one of my main mentors my whole life. And of course, I was the party planner for his 90th and 94th birthday parties. And boy, we had a great time with him, even though, you know, he was, especially the 94th party, he was in his hospital bed, but he was right out there with us, man, hanging for 3 days, having a ball. And of course, then he passed away a few months later. But you know, so he was such a huge influence in my life. And if somebody comes up to me and says, "Boy, I hear a lot of Clark Terry in you," I just say, "Thank you." You know, and of course, Clark and I did a CD together that has done very well. We recorded it in 1999, and we recorded it at Sony Studios in New York. And Rufus Reid was playing bass, and Sylvia Cuenca was playing drums. Reggie Thomas was playing piano, and John Allred was playing trombone. And it's funny because to his dying day, and at that 94th birthday party, he still talked about it. First of all, Clark was on over 900 recordings in his life. he said that of everything he'd ever done, that was one of his very favorites, was the one that we did together. And there was one point where we're doing a listening back, and it was on Strutman's Barbecue, which we did as a samba. And especially when I'm with Clark, I channel him. It's just like he gets into my head. And so we're listening to the playback, and Rufus Reed says something to Clark, and we talk for a minute, and then we're back, and it's when we're playing Force. And Clark looks at me and he says, "Is that me or is that you?" And all I said at that point was, "Thank you." You know, but so as far as my playing, I mean, Clark has to be my favorite player for so many people. And also, you know, one of the greatest clinicians ever, one of the greatest people to work with young people, or anybody. I mean, everybody that met Clark loved him. He was just such a positive, great person. And so, of course, touring on his big band was like another dream come true, like when I was on Stan's band. And he actually did feature me sometimes, which he didn't do too much with other trumpet players. But so anyway, I wrote this tune in honor of Clark. And, you know, everybody knows that Clark can play faster tempos than anybody. And so I wrote a tune that's fairly rapid, but I called it Creepin' with Clark. And it's actually the title tune of our recording. And so we'll see if I can get through it with no warm up, because and when we recorded it, because Clark had not played it, although it's loosely based on rhythm changes. But so we're going over it in the rehearsal the night before, and we get to the bridge, and Clark looks at me and says, "Where the hell did you get that bridge?" He actually practiced a little bit. So we'll see. But it's a fun tune, and we had a lot of fun. We played it, you know, a bunch of times together. All right. Okay. So that's,
oh man,
that's Creeping with Clark.
That's beautiful.
It's a fun tune. I still use it a lot, and I've got a big band chart for it. In fact, we've recorded it with the Kenton Legacy Orchestra too.
Yeah, great.
And like I say, it's got a few more changes, but it's basically rhythm changes, so that if I do it in a clinic, the kids can play on it and have
Yeah.
You know?
Well, Mike, I can't tell you how much excitement you've generated today for all the people that are going to hear this. Your career is an inspiration to all of us, and we honor you, we revere you, and we thank you for being a part of Jazz Zone Together. Thank you, my friend.
Oh, it's my pleasure, and I'm so glad you're doing this program, and I know you're going to have a bunch of great people on. The more we can get this stuff like this out, even to the general public, maybe we get some new jazz fans. Who knows?
Yeah.
You know, but we've got to keep this music alive. We just have to keep it alive.
I thank you just amazing stuff, great stories, a great history of your development in this field. So thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
To our viewers, thank you for watching and for being a part of the Jazz Zone Together community. We hope you enjoyed the interview and found it of real value.